hurricanes, even if it's mandatory, a hurricane can produce a destructive storm surge, even if it doesn't hit the area head on. The National Hurricane Center says storm surge is responsible for 12% of deaths caused by storms, and more than half of them were over the age of 60. WMNF will keep you updated live on air with active evacuation warnings if necessary this hurricane season.
You are tuned to WMNF Radio, 88.5 FM here in Tampa. And I'm your host for this public affairs program called Community Speaks, your host, Patro Mobili. And of course, looking forward to your telephone calls. Irene stands ready to take your telephone calls this hour as we talk about the news and your views. It is well known by now, the rich, mostly white and politically right-wing, have been moving to Florida. And the service industry, inflation has increased in Florida. As a result, another service is rising along with this increase. It's a service like Uber, but with guns. Black Wolf, a gun-toting TikTok famous rideshare service, recently expanded to Miami with a fleet of armed drivers from police, military, and security backgrounds. Founder Kerry King Brown, a private security guard and University of Miami alumni, launched a company in Atlanta in 2023 and now has 25 drivers across Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and other Florida cities. And how it works, riders can request an armed or unarmed driver. So we could talk about those kinds of services coming to Florida. It is also known people have been leaving the state due to its right-wing fascist politics. However, it is important to note people here in Florida are pushing back against fascism. Parents, school children are pushing against laws allowing book bans. They argue no one should be allowed to file for a book ban just because they don't want their child to read it. All children shouldn't have to fall victim to their book ban. And so there are some parents who are beginning to organize and push back. Florida's governor has continued a war on the LGBTQ plus community, black voting power, migrants, and also, as I mentioned, education. We here at WMNF, of course, continue to celebrate our diverse community. We are observing Pride Month as part of our mission calendar. And on June 19th, we will be celebrating the end of slavery in the national holiday called Juneteenth. We will have a big cookout right here at your community radio station. So we want to continue to reach out to our community. Of course, we want to thank you for your support last week here during our fund drive, our summer membership drive, and it came more than a little halfway close to meeting the goal here on Community Speaks. Of course, you can continue to show your support. You can go to WMNF.org and fill out a donation. Donate there. You just hit the donate key and make certain that you reference Community Speaks so that we can continue to reach the goal on Community Speaks. But we celebrate our community. The governor, like the Republicans nationally, have used the court system to try and checkmate U.S. politics. And no matter how fascist the policy, the Republicans believe they will most likely win at the highest courts. And meanwhile, corruption of the courts is coming out. We're beginning to find out just how much the rich have contributed to many of the right-wing justices on the court system, especially Clarence Thomas. And we're hearing about their disclosing at long last all of the money and gifts they've received from rich people. And of course, we know just by watching and observing the court that they carry an agenda where seems like the right wing can get away with just about anything, even if a state court, Supreme Court, decides against a policy, a Republican policy, usually they prevail in the Supreme Court. So this is a problem. This is not garnering a whole lot of goodwill and trust in that particular institution, while the Republicans purposely try to undermine most institutions that they feel they're not getting their way, especially the Justice Department, because they want to get away with a lot of crimes, especially the last president. And so many people right now are supporting that, his getting away with criminal behavior. So we're in a position right now, in a situation in this country politically, where there is a candidate trying to win office so that he can be propped up above the law. And there are millions of people who are very ready to play along with that program. So we're going to talk about what we are facing here in this country. Meanwhile, there's so many people who are trying to get their lives back in order after the pandemic, and policies has not made that easy, as state governors, especially in red states, have made it impossible for localities to govern themselves, especially when it comes to a policy that they don't agree with. And of course, localities and people on, who are Democrats don't have a court system in their pocket. We could talk about how one of the policies in which localities had civilian review boards over the police, and especially here in Tampa, where we were concerned about violations of civil rights, people getting stopped on their bikes because they were black. And usually the policy is, you stop and question someone who doesn't have a light on their bike at night, but just to be stopping people and ticketing them constantly, and 80% of those ticketed were black, required civilians to have some oversight over what police were doing. But the state legislature, who has propped up a right-wing governor, has enacted just like him, has decided that no location, no municipality shall have civilian review boards. And so as a result, these localities have been under pressure to dissolve them, and Tampa was one of them last week who dissolved its civilian review boards as a result of this state policy. But it's all part of a major program in this country to roll back powers of localities that are not in the pocket, in the thrall of the right wing. And this seems like to be the policy that these people are going with. And we have to be cognizant of it and push back, as we are seeing lots of people do in the process, in the middle of all of this going on. And also, as I was about to talk about post-pandemic, the return to office mandate that a lot of bosses are pushing on their workers. The study claims to have proof of what some have suspected, that the return to office mandates are just back channel layoffs. And post-COVID work culture is making everyone miserable, that if you don't return to work, then you're laid off or maybe even fired. And but there is no reason for such a mandate. A quarter of executives and a fifth of human resource professionals hoped return to office mandates would result in the staff just leaving, just quitting, and not caring about that job anymore. But while that statistic essentially admits the quiet part out loud, there was some merit to that belief that people did quit when return to office mandates were enforced at many of the largest companies, but it wasn't enough, the study reports. And so here we are in a post-pandemic world. We're in a world where we had this big uprising against racism and police brutality as a result of the murder of George Floyd, and yet we have a right wing that are in reaction to all of it. It reminds me of what it must have been like after the civil rights movement, especially after the Great Society programs were announced by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, and how the two parties just began to change personalities as a response. almost even like the response after the Civil War when Lincoln won the presidency and many states seceded from the Union. We're seeing that there were a lot of people who bolted from the Republican Party after the Great Society programs were announced. It must have, especially in the middle of a global world in which decolonization was happening, white power must have felt under threat at that time. And we saw a lot of people become reactionary to the right, towards moving towards politically right wing in this country. And we're seeing similar things happen now. We saw after 45's presidency, many people started acting just like him. And a lot of governors, started acting like him and demanding that the same types of policies is almost nationalized. A lot of the right-wing policies that were coming out of the Republican Party, we're still seeing this process happen. And what almost happened in the last election, the violence between, as a result of the fact that 45 lost the 2020 election. And then there were people who were who showed up to actually be fake electors in this country. So we saw them try to do that in 2020. Now there are people in the 2024 election who stand ready to act as agents for the right wing and for the Republicans if 45 loses again, and will actually show up and play the part of a fake elector. And there are people who are being put in place in the states and in supervisor of elections office that possibly will go along with the fake elector plot in the future in the 2024 election. So we have to keep our eyes wide open to the possibility. And of course, there's going to be artificial intelligence and lies being promulgated that way and to fake you out and to confuse you into thinking lies about the people you intend to vote for. So we're going to have to be very cognizant of all of these things building around us in this election. As we saw in Europe, the right wing has made inroads in European Parliament, the European Parliament elections, and it's caused France, at least right now, to react to that. And usually when we see Europeans acting a certain way, there's a copycat node among the right wing in this country who would try to act in similar ways. They've gone into Hungary and studied Orbán and the way he has run his politics and maintain office no matter what happens. And we're seeing them trying that process here. But as I said, they've already put a check on this society with the Supreme Court and feel like any policy, especially as we've seen the governor of Florida play out, any policy he could get a court to overturn it, especially with his control of the state Supreme Court. 6 justices seated, only 7 justices on the board, and that's how we lost the local policy of civilian police review boards, because all 6 of the governor's justices on the state Supreme Court voted to overturn local civilian police review boards. So we can continue to talk about those policies, and we could also talk about the economy. We know that the word inflation is going to be tied like albatross around President Joe Biden's neck, but we're not hearing any ideas coming from the Republicans. We just hear them trying to use it as an albatross. And when the Republicans had control of the White House, did nothing but, of course, push the greater possibility of inflation through its trade war with China. But in terms of manufacturing, we're going to have to continue to talk about the idea of manufacturing in this country. The U.S., for instance, doesn't make bicycles anymore. I'm looking at a story from Fortune magazine where we're going to try to change that. People are looking to try to change that. It took 30 years for the United States to lose almost its entire bike manufacturing industry. And so most bike-friendly members of Congress are aiming to fix all of that right now. It's according to one report, indeed, China has captured some 86%. That's a lot. 86.3% of the U.S. bike market. And now tariffs threaten that market. There's one congressman who says the 75-year-old, as one 75-year-old Democrat from a bike-friendly Portland, Oregon, he's introducing a new bill. His name is Congressman Earl Blumenauer, and he's going to introduce a new bill that aims to reshore domestic bike manufacturing by stealing it back from China, while also helping protect electric bikes from high tariffs that could put them out of reach for many citizens of the United States. So we could talk about that bill and what possibility, what implications are there. But there's so many things on the table that we need to talk about, and so many things that politically people, especially here in Florida, are fighting against. And we have to put in the context the economic issues, especially as it relates to inflation. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. This is Community Speaks, and my name is Patron Mobili, and this is an opportunity to talk to you about what is going on in the world around you, locally and nationally, internationally, but also want to continue to show your love and support for Community Speaks and for public affairs. You can continue to go online at WMNF.org and show your support by donating it so that we could help get Community Speaks over its goal. But I'm more interested in hearing from you on all of these issues. Of course, next hour, we'll be getting back to the music. Blaney Whalen will be coming in, and Victor joining her with It's the Music Monday after we get local news and update from The Scoop that's coming next hour. And of course, we are also celebrating Caribbean American Heritage Month. And so all of these things is an opportunity to celebrate you, our community. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. The Federal Reserve is on a lot of people's minds right now, especially those who are interested in learning the truth about this economy and about inflation. The Federal Reserve officials will be meeting this week. A statement they will issue may suggest that they've seen meaningful progress on inflation. It's a prelude to an eventual interest rate cut. And of course, they've had to raise interest rates in order to keep the rich from making new loans and possibly firing, laying off even more people and not creating any more jobs, not hiring new people. And then under such a scenario, if they had not started raising rates, we could have dipped into a recession, because if you're not creating jobs and the economy is not rising and inflation is continuing to rise, then those are the ingredients for a recession. But as long as jobs are being created, it's not a recession. And so far, we've seen at least 15 million jobs get created since the Biden administration has come to office. And the Federal Reserve, in the meantime, has had to continue to deal with the issue of inflation. So presidents don't have direct control over inflation. That is the job of the Federal Reserve. That's because the government's latest snapshot of the U.S. inflation is going to be released this week. And so the Feds are taking a closer look and meeting as a second time, meeting today, second day of his policy discussions. And they'll be at a news conference. Jerome Powell, who's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, will likely reiterate that Fed officials need further confidence that inflation is returning to its 2% target before they would consider rate cuts. And of course, having higher rates is supposed to encourage you to save money, because a high interest rate reward savings accounts. So the idea right now, the best way to get through it is to try to save more money, put more money away, and let that earn money so that it'll make life a little easier for everyday, ordinary, working class people who are trying to fight their way through this period. But as I said, inflation is an issue that the feds have to deal with, but is mostly right now, as I said at the top of the hour, fueled by the service industries. And there are a lot of people, especially here in Florida, rich people who moved here to Florida that need a lot of servants. They need a lot of services for themselves because they moved here not prepared. They need huge housekeeping staffs. They need security services. And now apparently they need Uber with guns. And so these are various services that are coming to this state to support the rich, to basically make life easy for them. And they're moving here so that they don't have to pay taxes. They don't want to pay income taxes in California and places where they've lived. We have people like Sylvester Stallone moving to Florida because he doesn't want to pay taxes. You know, we have these rich folks claiming, poverty in terms of taxes. And this is a key issue that fuels disinformation on the right wing, politically on the side of the right wing. But it's hard to say because the officials themselves are still trying to fight inflation and figure out what would be, it is a snapshot of the economy right now, what would be the best time to start lowering interest rates. But as we talk through this political campaign system, people need to know and understand who fights inflation, what inflation is, and who's fueling inflation. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. As I said, unlike a lot of people on the right, the LGBTQ plus community is celebrated many places, especially here, including right here, but also in New York City, a subway stop is probably going to be renamed after Stonewall, which was a landmark LGBTQ plus rights movement incident that took place in the 1960s, late 1960. Actually, it was in 1969. It was this month in 1969. So lawmakers in New York have approved legislation that renames a New York City subway station in honor of the Stonewall uprising. The state legislature approved this bill Wednesday of last week that would change the name of Christopher Street Sheridan Square subway station in Greenwich Village to Christopher Street Stonewall National Monument Station. The bill now heads to the governor's office for her approval in New York. Her office did not comment over the weekend. The Stonewall Inn was raided by police in June of 1969, sparking a riot and several days of protests, and it marked a seminal moment in the fight for LGBTQ rights in this country. But there are so many people who want to take this country backwards on all of these issues, including race issues, including the progress that we've made politically on voting rights and getting better representation in our home districts, and even having the ability to govern ourselves over a red state governor who doesn't agree with your policies. But we're going to continue to talk about what these issues are and how people are pushing back. This is Community Speaks here on your non-commercial radio station, WMNF. I'm your host, Patro Mobili. And, of course, you can also hear me on Sundays with Sunday Forum and with Walter L. Smith II. And, it's all part of the public affairs programming that we offer here at your non-commercial radio station, how we celebrate our communities, various members of our communities, various groups in our communities, and how we support empowerment of people who feel under threat and celebrate them. 813-239-9663 is the number to call if you want to join any discussion here on Community Speaks. You can also write me, WMNF, DJ at WMNF.org. That's DJ at WMNF.org. And we could read your comments on the air if you have something you want to share with the community If you don't want to use your own voice, I'll read it for you. 813-239-9663 is the number to call if you want to speak in your own voice about these various and sundry issues that we are dealing with and trying to come to terms with in this country, especially politically. So we are looking forward to hearing from you here on Community Speaks. There's a lot going on. There's, of course, a lot of humanitarian crises issues that I'd like to continue to keep front and center on our minds as we look at what is happening on the continent of Haiti and how Florida has contributed to that with its guns flowing from this state to the Caribbean and especially to Haiti, who have armed those gangs out there. I'm listening to people who were talking about the way gangs were armed in this country, especially in the run-up to the crack wars in those early days of the 1980s. There are people who, gang members who said that just walking around the community, they would find guns that were just placed out in the community for people to find. And I'm talking about semi-automatic weapons or AKs just laying out on the ground so that gang members can find them, as if the idea is, go ahead and kill yourselves, kill each other, but protect your drug profits in the process and let's keep that going. So we've heard these ideas of how guns are flowing into poor communities and in black communities that fuel the criminality that goes on. And those guns are just given away, were basically just being given away. So we can follow up on all that. Anybody have a history of that? I'd be interested in hearing about it. 813-239-9663 is the number to call. We'll see what Lynn has to say from Tampa. You've been waiting for a few minutes. Go ahead, Lynn. Thank you for calling and joining me here on Community Speaks. You say what?
Hi, I'm calling you to correct a couple of statements that you made. First and foremost, Sylvester Stallone moving to Florida because he didn't want to pay taxes in California. That is utterly not the truth, and you can check that. I am a dear friend of his and have been for many years. He's moving here because his daughters have moved out of California. They're living some of them in Florida and going to college, and that's why he moved, because he wanted to be closer to them. So how
many parents do that?
That is incorrect. The other incorrect thing...
Wait a minute. How do you know that's correct? Just because you're a dear friend, just because you said he's different, that has been reported, Lynn. I'm not just making it up.
And what's been reported doesn't mean that it's been true.
Okay, that's true. I'll go with that.
And I know exactly the reason why he left Cali.
So he has to accompany his daughters to college. He's moving to Florida for that.
I did not say he had to accompany them. See, you put that word in my
Sounds like
mouth.
That's what you were saying, that they're coming to college here, and you were trying to debunk the reason that was given, that was reported. So I'm just asking you.
I mean, I'm telling you that that's not the reason he left California. He left there because taxes was one reason, but the main reason was because he didn't have any of his family living there anymore.
All right.
And as people get older, the older generation tend to move where their kids are. That is a known fact. Secondly, about the book ban in Florida. Now, I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent. The book ban was because some of the books were totally indecent for middle-aged school kids, especially not even middle-aged. They were in the third grade. And one of the books that was in the library on the table as you walked into the door literally gave instructions how to give a blowjob. These are the books that are being banned. So please, fact-check your information.
You need to fact-check your information, because I happen to know those are not the only books that are being banned. There are a lot of books that have big... Listen, go ahead and talk all you want over me. I let you talk, and you have given some infactual statements as well. I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but I'm just saying, if there's a book that was talking about giving a so-called blowjob in a school, then why did it take so long for so many people to find it? And furthermore, why is it that all children have to fall under your book bans? That's the question.
8-year-old kids reported that to a school board with his parents and read 2 paragraphs out of that book.
But I still want to know, why is it that your kid why couldn't that kid not have the book banned? Why does all kids have to have book banned because you don't like it?
Well, let me ask you something, sir. Let me ask you something directly. Do you think it's appropriate for kids to learn sex when they're in the 2nd and 3rd grade?
It doesn't matter what I believe. If I had a child, I would think it would be okay. It's my business. I think it would be okay, but I don't think it is okay for you to decide what it is that my kid ought to read. And I think the right wing need to get that in their heads. You need to stop trying to overlord over everybody.
I didn't say I was Republican, nor did
I know you said that, but that's beside the point. The point is the Republicans are pushing this policy, and you're calling here to try to support it. And I think that it's wrong. That is the point of it, that it is wrong. You cannot tell every child that they can't read a book just because you don't like the book.
I think it's indecent for a child.
That's fine, because you think it's indecent. That doesn't mean my child has to be suffering because of it.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think it's indecent for a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader to learn how to give blowjobs in school, in their library books. Excuse me. If you don't think that's indecent, then something's wrong with you.
But if you think that you need to ban and everybody needs to follow your ideas and your rules, then there's something wrong with you. My child shouldn't have it. Listen, let me ask you this. Why is sex the worst thing in the world?
Who said it was?
Well, why is it so bad if children know about it?
I didn't say it was.
Well, you want to ban books. You support banning books that talk about it. Listen, let me see what other people have to say, Lynn. Thank you so much, because you're not letting anybody else talk. Go ahead, Mark. Let's see what you have to say. Do you agree with what Lynn has to say, or what is it that you want to talk about? Thank you for calling Community Speaks. Well, maybe you didn't. Well, let's see. The bottom line is there are people in this state who will argue back and forth that your child needs to have something banned from them because they don't like it. And that's wrong. This is the issue. You could talk about sex to make the conversation prurient as much as you possibly can. You can't hide sex from children forever. And why is ignorance supported? And I think that the idea is, it is more than just about sex. It is a lot of politics, a lot of political information that people want to ban out of schools. They want to hide it from your children. There's a lot of history. They don't want your children to read about it. They don't want your children to know, especially white children, to know what their ancestors did. The governor all but stated it, that we don't want children feeling bad in the classroom. So we're going to ban all the books that we don't like and care less about whether or not you want your child to understand history or your child to understand humanity, human life, human reality, human sexuality, and use that as an excuse, especially when it comes to sex, as an excuse to say that all people should be made ignorant because we don't like sex. We need to protect children from sex. We need to, in terms of knowledge of sex. And yet, a lot of the people who do engage in sex crimes against children, comes from the same political stance. A lot of Republicans get caught up in these, and a lot of people in the church and the clergy. A lot of people, while these same people act as if sex is the worst thing you can talk about in the world. 813-239, which is really just a way of pushing and promoting the idea of bullying people who are sexual minorities in any community. Go ahead, Mark. You're on Community Speaks, and you want to add what?
Yes, hello. My name is Mark from Tampa. I'm going to try and be quick and try and be calm because the last caller really kind of got me heated because, one, a few things. We don't know if it's truly true that they'd be independent. I'd like to get their facts on, like, for example, single-payer health care, things like that, to see if they'll actually, swap to, well, now you sound like a Republican. But the second thing is, while they may feel a certain way about those books that are in schools. Another thing that they don't understand is, or I shouldn't say don't understand, that I want to make clear is that there is still freedom of speech in this country. And it really bothers me because one of my friends is an Army veteran. Another one was an Air Force veteran who passed away. And
sorry to hear that.
I recently also heard about Airman Roger Fortson. And, you know, with these books that supposedly are, you know, bad for children and whatnot, we don't hear anything about the outrage that should be there for something that happened, like, you know, the killing of Roger Fortson. So I just wanted to say that, and I'll get off the air. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think I understand your point. You know, there's a lot of false outrage being promulgated from the right in this country and get everybody all up in arms about. And the things that you should be outraged about, or most people really are outraged about, are minimized. Go ahead, Fez from Bradenton. You want to add what to this conversation here on Community Speaks?
Thanks for taking my call. The point about this type of culture wars is that, you know, what I've observed about politics my whole life is that I want to say the right, but a politician or somebody who wants to do a magic trick has everybody paying attention to the right hand or book banning or some really hot topic while the left hand is busy stealing your wallet or taking away your free speech or, you know, working on this law so that, you know, you can't protest on government property anymore, you know, because we're so easily distracted in this country against, you know, we're so easy. Our attention span somehow shrunk in the last few decades.
Especially after 2020. I don't know what happened. Because...
Yes, and when I was a child, my parents moved from California to Oregon because it was one of two states, Oregon and Utah, where you can homeschool your child without having to send them to public school. And this is, you know, I pick your own reading list, pick what, you know, pick your education. And that was, you know, something I certainly didn't understand when I was a child, but or the full implications, let's say, but as I've grown, you know, old, I have not been able to believe in the last, you know, election cycles. How did half the country vote for this guy, you know? I was like, well, maybe they did me a favor after all. Maybe that's why they didn't want to put me in public school.
Yeah.
But I don't, you know.
Because you're going to question things.
Debate. Sorry?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I always question things, but it was the, how do I say, I've always said that they've been dumbing down the education system for the last decades. It couldn't have always been this bad. They had to have taught more history at some point, you know, because it just didn't, it didn't add up to me. You know, that, you know, I walked into, it's hard to get a diploma that way. I went in and took the equivalency test, and it was shocking to me. I was like, this really was supposed to take me 12 years? And she looked at me and said, well, that test wouldn't have, been if you were been sitting in the front row and paying attention the whole time. And I, it just, there's not a very, how do I say, that sense. I thought about how the way it just appalls me what we're talking about. Circling back to sex and books. We drove around the country a couple times in a motorhome, and I would just go through used bookstores and pick out everything I wanted, and that was probably some of the best education. I picked up Tantric Sex, one of the best original translations I found later, probably by 8 years old, and thank God it was answered more questions at that age. And I think everybody should read that book. It's just
it would have better understanding of our own sexuality if we did such things. But
we need to know ourselves before I say you have to love yourself before you can love others. And if you don't know yourself, how can you expect to be with someone else really well?
Right.
That is 101, and it's 101 in the book. And I think that the idea that we're trying to keep children in the dark is the kind of manipulation that the Catholic Church did, which is why we had wars in the Dark Ages, and we overcame that. And if you keep people in the dark about all of that history, they won't ever question why are we repeating it, which is just more scary, because Hitler also controlled sexuality in that sense, keeping his soldiers in that kind of stiff reform that good Catholic should.
But I think I get your larger point too, that while there's all this outrage about sex and little things like that, there's no outrage about the lack of knowledge about history and civics, which is why we can end up voting for an idiot such as we did in 45, and people don't understand about the court system. There's some people who still didn't know that justices can't be fired, that those are jobs for life. And so it's important and incumbent to know about how they're carrying out their job and its impact on us. But thank you, Fez.
It is. It's hard when you go down the ballot and you see, and there's a whole bunch of justices on the ballot, and you research them, and you can't hardly find anything out about them other than that they are in this church or they run this church. It's like the only other thing on public notice that usually you find. It's like, okay, you're a Christian.
Or Roman Catholic or whatever.
Society,
And that's an important point, Fez, and I'm glad you said it out loud, and that is to research these judges. We talk about the issue, we talk about the candidates in the House of Representatives or for office, but we don't look deep enough into these judges, and they're like little dictators, really, especially when they get to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but it's a long ladder, but they have to step on it somewhere. It's true. It's true. It can be half the ballot or a quarter of the ballot sometimes. And you're like, nobody talked about this on the news. Why? Because no one really cared. And half the people turned off their news or turned off the radio before it came to the news anyway, right? But where was that?
Right.
That's recovered.
Thank you. We're going to see if we've got some more people to talk. But thank you for calling. Bye, Fez. Thank you for calling from Bradenton, and appreciated that call. It's always good to have somebody that we can really delve deep into why they feel the way they feel. Let's go to Stephen to St. Pete, see what you have to offer this conversation here on Community Speaks. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes, I just walked into the house for lunch and everything. I was listening to the show a few minutes ago. You were talking to a lady, And maybe I didn't hear it right. So you think it's okay and it's appropriate to teach a child who is in the first or second grade how to give a blowjob? Did my ears hear that?
Well,
right?
that's what she said. She claims that there are books in the school libraries that are doing that. Well,
no. Do you think it's okay?
It's irrelevant. No, I don't think so. But it's irrelevant.
Very relevant.
Listen, why y'all don't let people talk? Come on now. Listen, I'm just trying to get you to understand that it is. The point was, it doesn't matter what you're outraged about, what you don't want your child to read. Ban it from your child. That's all we're saying. Ban it from your child. Don't ban it from everybody. It's irrelevant whether or not you don't like it or whether or not I like it. The fact of the matter is, it's something everybody has right to knowledge. Go ahead, Josh from Clearwater. You say what?
Yeah, good show. I was kind of upset with the judges not backing the elected official in Orlando from keeping her job. And and also hearing all the callers today, I had some conversations this weekend. Long story short, I feel like the conservative brand, or what people say is conservative, is no longer Milton Friedman's, The Economist definition of what a conservative is. A conservative is supposed to be for freedom. So I don't understand how an elected official can't keep their job. That's two of them now that I know of in Florida. And how, like, this whole book banning thing goes on. It just doesn't seem, I don't know, I challenge those who know conservatives or say that they're conservatives to really take a look at, are they a conservative? And I think there should be a new definition for these people that follow Trump and DeSantis. Because I know a lot of Republicans, they don't like them, and they're conservative. So what do you call what they're doing? What is this? It's not conservatism anymore.
Right. Well, I think the conservatives should rise up and demand that they call themselves something else. The far right fascists should call themselves something else. But they're doing what they're doing under the guise of conservatism, and so there should be an internal war, between the Republicans to decide, are you guys conservative or not? Because you don't represent what I think conservative is.
I thought that the Constitution and the laws of our land laid it out so like a sheriff can be an elected sheriff. So yet a governor or a Congress passes some law that the local people don't want, that sheriff's an elected official. And that sheriff can say, no, I'm not going to enforce that law. I thought that was part of the checks and balances of the country that we made. And I guess I just don't know what the elected officials that lost their jobs can do if the Supreme Court of Florida said, sorry, we're going with what Ron DeSantis decided.
Right.
I asked you, I asked everybody. I don't know, is there another appeal? Is there anything else they can do?
Well, no, because, he decided, he picked those 6 justices that voted with him. So it's become just another political body, the way they've done it. They've bastardized many parts of the judiciary system, and so nobody really trusts that judiciary. But I think that was part of the long program, the long war that they've been having ever since the Great Society programs. They said, well, we can trump all of this by just taking control of the courts, and so we can get away with whatever we want to do. Even if that means gerrymandering, even if that means banning books and banning people, banning history, banning our, anything we want to do, the Supreme Court would ultimately, say it's okay. And so I think that diminishes the power of, like, the federal judge that tried to save the job of Monique Morell in Central Florida, and Andrew Warren here in Hillsborough County's job. The federal judge said, the governor was wrong, but there's nothing I could do. So I think that system has been bastardized by the Republicans as part of their long game ever since the 1960s. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Which is why we keep finding ourselves in this situation. I think the people are the ultimately could break this quagmire by no longer electing these guys and recognizing the danger that they represent to all of our rights.
Well, so far, like I said, I think there's got to be a new word for these conservatives that are not conservatives, that don't understand what freedom is. Because the result that I feel is that elected officials cannot do their job. They're removed from their seats, which feels like an infringement of the power of the people.
Yeah.
And I also know in Vero Beach, they banned a book version of the Diary of Anne Frank because the girls were outside looking at statues that were naked.
Mm-hmm.
Come on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the Diary of Anne Frank. And I don't know, that's just how I feel. But thank you, Mobility. Great show.
Hey, thank you for calling. Certainly appreciate that call. You can also write me. You can write DJ at WMNF.org. That's DJ at WMNF.org to show, to give your ideas there as well if you don't want to hang on to the phone too long. But getting some emails of support, people saying they enjoying the conversation today. And of course, if you want to continue to show monetary support for this program to keep it on the air, keep it strong. We're going to be on the air, but we want to keep it strong and get more engagement going on here. You can go WMNF.org and donate online. It's probably going to be more difficult to do it on the phone today, but you can go online and donate and make certain you reference this program, Community Speaks. And we can take it from there because, these issues are just too important, but we have to put it in some kind of context and decide that what we're doing and what we need done, we're doing it because we have all the information, and we have to know the games that people are playing, and they've been trying to reverse the progress in this country that we've seen in this country since the 1960s. We've seen so many attempts to try to turn the clock back, and I, for one, am not going back. And so that's why it's important that we are able to come up here and put it in context, give it, the definition. The political motion that you're seeing around you has definition. It has historical precedents and reasons for it happening. But if you are continuing to be distracted, you're not going to get to that type of analysis. That's why we have Community Speaks here on the air. And of course, like I said, it did not reach the goal completely last week. So would really appreciate if you went online to WMNF.org and continue to show some support for Community Speaks, because it's important that we be able to come in here and put these issues in context, because there are a lot of people lying to you in this society, and it is important that we have truth front and center somewhere, and not just reacting, not just in reactionary mode, not just being reacting to our feelings, but we're putting all our emotion into analysis. And it's important. I've been doing this for over 30 years. And so I understand a lot of propaganda when I hear it. But unfortunately, that's my time. We're out of time. Those who are waiting on the telephone lines, I do apologize, but we have to get out and make room for the scoop, and then we're going to get back to the music here on your non-commercial radio station. This is WMNF in Tampa. This has been Community Speaks. I'm your host, Patro Mobili, and I can get a little fiery sometime, and that's why I'm here. We got to continue to do it. Thank you, Irene, for answering the telephone calls, and I'll be back next week. So go online, support the show, and tune in next week for Community Speaks. This is WMNF Tampa.